Welcome to our posts. Today we will see stories of r/malicious compliance. Not 5 minutes early, but 10 minutes late, and it cost them a fortune. The 5-minute early post reminded me of a story that happened to a friend of mine. Let's call him Bobby. Bobby was a CNC machinist, a good one, and the only one. The company he worked for made an intricate product, and his CNC part was crucial. The rest of the product bolted onto it. The finished product sold for tens of thousands of dollars. It took 3 hours to make this piece. Bobby would make 3 a day. He'd make one in the morning, take his coffee break, then make another, and take his lunch break. That ate up about 6.75 hours. He'd stay late to make the third part, and make 2 hours overtime. His new foreman turned out to be more than a bit of a jerk. He'd try to get Bobby to do other tasks, and Bobby said no, as he needed to monitor the CNC machine during all stages of the cycle. Foreman bitched to the plant manager, who told him to back off and leave Bobby alone. One day there was a bad snowstorm, and Bobby was 10 minutes late. The foreman was there to greet him at the time clock, with a shit-eating grin on his face, holding a demerit slip. Bobby had clocked in a minute late the previous week, and the union rules said that if you were late twice within 14 days you got 20 demerit points. Bobby and foreman got into a bit of an animated conversation, and the union steward came over and said that Bobby had no choice but to take the demerit hit. So Bobby went to work. His shift was 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., but he usually stayed until 6:30 to finish the last part. Not today. At 4:30 he shut the machine down and headed for the door. The next morning, foreman comes over and says that the assembly team is short a part. Yeah, I know. I'm working on it right now. It'll be done in 2 hours. But they need 3 a day. Why didn't you make 3 of them yesterday? Because my shift is over at 4:30, and I went home. What? You stay every night until the third part is finished. Bobby pulled the demerit slip out of his shirt pocket, looked foreman in the eye, and said, not anymore. Bobby had done the math. Every week, instead of getting 15 parts, they were getting 10 or 11. Foreman tried to sweep it under the rug, but within a few days chaos ensued. The assemblers had no core part, and their team went to the plant manager to let him know that production was falling. The assemblers liked it. They got to hang around yakking while they waited for the next CNC part to arrive. Eventually, there was a meeting with plant manager, foreman, union steward, and Bobby. Foreman tried to throw Bobby under the bus saying that he refused overtime. Union steward pointed out that, as per the contract, mandatory overtime was only in case of emergencies, and this wasn't an emergency. Bobby had every right to decline the overtime. Foreman lost his temper, started yelling at Bobby and union steward, and was asked to leave the meeting. Plant manager knew he was screwed, and looked at Bobby and asked, "What's it going to take to get you to work the overtime?" Bobby smiled and replied, "As long as foreman is my supervisor, I won't be working a minute of overtime." And that was the last anyone saw foreman. By sticking to the contract, Bobby cost the company a handful of parts worth many thousands of dollars, and put the company into a position where their lowered production would cost them even more, in perpetuity. Bobby worked a couple of Saturdays to catch up, and made double time for those shifts. They hired a new foreman, who was explicitly instructed, do not, under any circumstances, F with Bobby. Next story. No one ever makes it hot enough? Okay then, you asked for it. I used to be a chef in a Mexican restaurant in a small town in Australia nearly 40 years ago. We were modestly popular and I loved working there. One night a young man came in to dine with a young lady. It was very obviously a first date. They ordered a nachos to share with a side of jalapenos for their entree, and he ordered a steak Veracruz, hot, for his main, and the young lady ordered a chicken burrito, mild, for hers. I, as I usually did throughout the night, would walk around the tables and ask if people were enjoying the food. After the nachos, I checked on them and the young man informed me that the chili that accompanied the nachos were not hot at all and that he loved hot food. I was informed that he had traveled extensively and had eaten some of the hottest food in the world and that no one had ever made a dish too hot for him. He reiterated that he wanted his steak main extra hot. To be honest, I found him to be pompous and rather obnoxious in the way he was speaking down to me and found myself taking a disliking to him. I will add at this point that the young lady was looking a little uncomfortable and I got the impression her date was not going as she had expected. I headed to the kitchen. I made her a lovely chicken burrito while putting together his steak. He wanted it hot? He was going to get it. Our steak Veracruz was usually a steak cooked and topped with our house tomato sauce base with some capsicums, bell peppers for you Americans, and onions with a touch of chili. On this occasion I set to work. Keep in mind this was Australia back in the 80s and we did not get a lot of different chilies back then and a jalapeno was considered hot by most Aussie palates. Hey, we were an uneducated bunch. I had a few bird's eye chilies in the kitchen that were mainly there for the staff and the resident Mexican guitarist's meals, so I started with those. I finally diced about 10 of those with their seeds. I then started sweating off my onions and capsicums. I then threw in the chilies and then I added about a tablespoon of chili powder and about a tablespoon of cayenne. I soon felt the fumes hit my nose and the back of my throat and my eyes started watering. I ran to the door of the kitchen to get a breath of breathable air as the air in my tiny kitchen was rapidly becoming unbreathable. I ran back to my pan and put a ladle of the house tomato sauce in. I then let that simmer for a few minutes. I then added some chopped up jalapenos from a jar in my fridge and thought why not, and in went a bit more chili powder. I then put the flash fried steak in to finish it off in the sauce. I served it all up on a plate with some rice, served up the chicken burrito and hit the bell for the waitress to serve it to the table. The waitress came back and told me that as she placed it in front of him he said this had better be hot. She assured him the chef had done as he requested. I went to the door of the kitchen, joined by my waitress, to watch the show unfold, and unfold it did. I watched with glee as he sliced the steak, took a piece on his fork and with a smug look on his face, he put it in his mouth. He took a chew and then realized his mistake. I saw it. That moment when his face changed, but he was trying so hard not to show it. He couldn't. He was on a date and he had bragged so hard and now he had to go through with it. He ate the steak. I could see every ounce of pain on his face. He struggled. He struggled hard. His date watched him with a slight smile on her lips and I got the impression that she was thoroughly enjoying his pain. He went through several jugs of water. He sweated. He barely spoke. He looked damned uncomfortable. At the end of the meal I came out of the kitchen and asked him if he had enjoyed his meal. His words? Could have been hotter. He never came back. His date? She became a regular and told us he was an insufferable fool and she never saw him again. I have no regrets other than I wish Carolina Reapers had been around then. Next story. No, I said okay. A few years ago, I was moving my business to a new location that needed 6 months to be built out. I informed our current alarm company a few months before the move that we'd be moving services, which for whatever reason they couldn't do. I had to open a new site on the account and then I could close the old one after the move. Sure, that's fine. They got all the details and sold me the newer system that would be connected to the internet so I could monitor it from my phone. Sounds great. So they told me they could install it next week, but I had to have the internet set up and running before they could do it. I informed them the phone's lines and internet would not be installed until later as I didn't want to pay for services we were not using and I would let them know when that was installed so they could come out for their install. Everything satisfied, the call was complete. A few days later, I started getting weekly phone calls from their installers telling me they were on their way to the new site to do the install. To which I had to go through the explanation of the internet won't be installed until later and that I would call them and let them know when that was done. Each time they oh, okay. Sounds good, we'll wait to hear from you. But then the following week, it would repeat again. On the 6th week, I got the same weekly call from the alarm company installer. Hi, this is Jim, just letting you know we'll be at your site in about 30 minutes to do the install. So this time I said okay. We hung up and I went back to work, which was happening at our current location. No workers or work was happening at the new site on this day. About 30 minutes later I got a call from Jim saying the doors are locked and nobody is answering. I said I know, nobody is there today and the internet won't be installed until next month anyway. At this point, he starts getting agitated with me and asked why I scheduled an install for today and why I told him I'd be there when he called. I explained, I didn't. You said you'd be there in 30 minutes. I said okay. Amazingly, the call stopped and I called them a couple weeks before the move and they came out and installed just fine. Next story. Go get another offer, okay. This happened last summer. I'd been working at an office for about 3 years. We were starting to come back to a hybrid schedule. Perhaps not coincidentally, not long after I caught COVID and I was just so tired for next month. My workload had been getting ever higher and higher. Every time I tell my manager I had too much to do and we needed to offload some of it to someone else, he'd tell me, well, you're doing a good job, keep it up. He generally didn't listen to anything you told him, and my job was simpler the more I avoided him. I'd previously been at a place I enjoyed, but I took a chance on a move to fill some experience in my career I felt I needed. Even up to this point, despite the burnout, I felt like I was in the position I wanted to be in. Then my manager starts telling me about how he's working on hiring someone who used to work there before I did, who was at the place I had come from. He has the same level of experience as me, but he's commanding a salary 20+% higher than I was making. This really upset me. I tried to let it go, but after a few days I confronted my manager saying that if the new guy was coming in at a higher salary then I should get a bump in pay too. Go get another offer, I can't do anything unless you get another offer. Something in my head snapped. Between COVID fatigue and burnout I realized how exhausted I was and that it was time to leave. That day I called my previous employer, and 3 days later I had signed a job offer. I'm now making net 20% more, have an appropriate amount of work, and report to a manager who listens to what I say. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share and subscribe the channel or posts.